Forgot my coffee. Got a kid hopefully bringing it here in a second. Hopefully bringing it. This could get bad. Numbers 18. Verse 8 is where we're starting. Maybe making it all the way to the end. I don't know. We will see. I hear something. Oh, I was hoping it was coffee delivery. Oh, yep. It's getting closer. Woo! Thank you. Bye. So much better. Okay, so, wrong button. There we go. All right, now I have coffee. We can actually get going here. Oh, this is a sweet cup. It says, grace upon grace. And pastors from Sandpoint, Idaho, or pastor and his wife, gave that to us when we were at a conference. And we had Hannah as a little baby. And Hannah is the Hebrew for grace, and her name is Hannah Grace. So grace upon grace. And so they got us the mug. That was a very sweet gift. All right. Verse 8, offerings for support of the priests. So there's the heave offerings. This shall be yours, verse 9, of the most holy things reserved by fire, every offering of theirs, every grain offering, sin offering, trespass offering, right? Shall be most holy for you and your sons. In the most holy place you shall eat it. It is yours. Verse 12, the best of the oil, the grain offering, the first fruits they offer to you, I have given them to you. Whatever first ripe fruit is in their land, which they bring to the Lord, verse 13, shall be yours. And so the idea here is that there's certain stuff that was kept by the priests. And honestly, this isn't too different than today in the sense that, hopefully many people, right, tithe. They bring money to the church. They give to the church proportionally, is what the New Testament says. They give proportionally out of your increase. And then from that, we can pay the electric bill and we can purchase new seats, chairs, right? We have electrical stuff and worship equipment and all this. And out of that pot, the church takes 10% tithe and actually gives it out to missionaries and sets it aside for benevolence needs when there's people in need. And also out of that main fund, they give me an income to pay for my house and my family and my kids and all of that. And so this is the same principle in the Old Testament. So just like we were talking before, again, how there's models that we see it in the Old Testament and the New. It looks a little different. It has a different face on it, but it's still a very similar system where the priests and the Levites and all of them, they were provided for out of the income of the children of Israel. It's worth noting, verse 21, behold, I have given the children of Levi all the tithes in Israel as an inheritance in return for the work which they perform, the work of the tabernacle. And then, and really, I guess I kind of already talked about it with our church, but in verses 25 to 32, it talks about how the Levites also give tithes, right? Of all your gifts, verse 29, you shall offer every heave offering during the Lord, and from all the best of them, and consecrate part of them. And so, a few things. So, the tithes come in, and that for the money. So they got, see, with them, people brought food, people brought, animals, grain, fruit, everything, oil. And so they would get that stuff, just practical things. But then they would also then get the actual tithe money. And yeah, it would be divided out different directions according to the need. Aaron would get a lot, and then the Levites get not as much as Aaron. And they put, basically, pay salaries for people to live off of. Now, what people don't always realize is that many believe that the Jews were giving 23.33%. That they were actually two different tithes. If you go through scripture, and I don't actually have all the chapters memorized, this is not a topic I talk about a ton, but two different tithes that they would actually bring. So a tenth here and a tenth there. And then it didn't go to the priest, but to pay for the poor and to help cover the needs of the poor and the needy, they would give a tithe every 3 years. So when you just do the math and average it out, 3.33%, 10% divided 3 ways. So that's the average. Actually, they tithe 23.33%. But of course, the temple and the entire Levitical, system was a huge system to run. So it wasn't, cheap necessarily. But then again, the Levites tithe. And so, yeah, we see how the church tithes, like I said, revival church tithes, we take 10% of what comes in, we give it out. I tithe, right? At tithes and offerings. Tithes, the 10%, and offerings, things above and beyond the 10%. And I think I can just plainly share this. This is just facts. I've talked with some of the people who do the money, specifically our main person who does income, Roberta. And I've actually told them, you know what? Because I don't know what people give. I stay 100% out of that realm of things. But I've asked, you know what, if an elder isn't giving, let me know. Because that's a problem. Because even the Levites tithed. Even Aaron and his sons tithed. And I expect my leaders to be leading by example. And so it's something that, everyone should be giving in. It's not people, and that's something I think it'd just be weird. If you had leaders who were receiving from the church, but then they weren't giving back to the church. And so there's that side of things. But yeah, so this is just showing all the stuff. And then last but not least, it's kind of a nuts and boltsy, but it all ties in again with the church today and how we run things. But in verse 32, it says, you shall bear no sin because of it, and when you have lifted up the best of it, but you shall not profane the holy gifts of the children of Israel, lest you die. I know how every church is different, but I'm just going to quote straight from Joe Focht in Calvary Chapel of Philadelphia, where he says that, every single one of his pastors on staff, they agree not to drink. He just says, yeah, we're just going to go by that higher standard and just hold everyone to it. And part of what he said is because they're being paid by the holy tithes that come into our church. And he's like, and I don't want people's money that they've given to the Lord being used to go and buy alcohol. I'm like, we don't have a big paid staff. We don't have this, so some things are addressed as far as when you're a small church, you address things as they come in a sense. But yeah, we should be considering as the leaders, as people who are actually receiving pay from the church, how we spend it. And that we're not just profaning the gifts. And that's what he was talking about, was to take what people had given to the Lord as holy and then profaning it and blowing it on things. And so I would strongly say that pastors and those in ministry ought to be frugal. They ought to be wise with their money. And they shouldn't be blowing money on just frivolous and stupid things. I actually have it written in my Bible, no $500 sneakers. I remember a while back, I have no idea if it's still going. It's probably a decade ago now, but the Preachers with Sneakers, over a decade. But yeah, Preachers and Sneakers. And it was like a Twitter page or something like that, where they went and they were just looking at these guys online, some of these big name preachers, and then the shoes they're wearing and identifying them and like showing how these guys are wearing like $1,000 pair of sneakers. Now, one thing I've learned is not to judge, though I kind of have a struggle with that when I see things that seem frivolous to me, but remembering that everyone has their things. There's a balance to be struck. I'm just going to put it that way before I say something stupid, because part of me gets frustrated and angry when I see, it's like, man, like, but at the same time, who knows? Like, maybe I'm spending money on something that people get frustrated and angry about, And the other thing to keep in mind, though, too, is that, again, that we don't be too quick to judge. I can't say I agree with everything, but I remember an interview that Brian Broderson did with Rick Warren. And something in that interview kind of stood out to me. You know, Rick Warren wrote The Purpose-Driven Life. It became a huge hit. And he makes a ton of money from those book sales. I make money from book sales. Not a ton of money, but I make some money from book sales. You know, and it's kind of like I get a little bit of money from book sales, and that's part of what I like try and save up and spend on fun things. You know, it's like, well, hey, I can use that money for something kind of fun. But what Rick Warren actually said was that him and his wife did, they tithed, but they started making so much money that they started giving more to the church, giving 20% of their income, giving 30% of their income, giving 40% of their income, giving 50, 60, 70, 80. And he finally said, when we started giving 90% of our income, we were reversed or inverse tithers. We gave to the church 90% of what we were taking in. We just had this peace from God. You can keep the other 10%. And if you want to buy stuff with it, buy stuff with it. Now, there are some pastors who maybe would have chosen to continue in a vow of poverty. And no matter how much money they made, they would just live, And Rick's was like, you know what? We give 90% away. And I have a peace where I don't feel ashamed spending the 10%. And the funny thing is he can keep 10% and still be a millionaire because he's pulling in tens of millions of dollars. So how did I get onto all that? Not profaning, though. Yeah. The people who are making a living from the ministry need to be very careful and cautious with how they are spending the gifts of God. On the flip side, those who are observing the people in the ministry, we might not know all the details. And that is the fact that some people might actually receive no salary from their church, 0% of tithes come to them. And actually, Rick Warren did that also, for what it's worth. He wasn't receiving, well, actually, I don't know. I can't verify that stuff. So don't look at me as the source of, I want to be clear about that. I was just some stuff I gleaned from an interview. I'm not the source of authority on this. But like, as far as I understood, I think he wasn't taking any income from the church because he was just making so much money from books. He's like, I don't need the church to pay me any money. And so again, it's like when you see someone, well, he's bought this, he's spending church money. Well, maybe he's not. So that was something I got convicted of eventually, was just being sure that I didn't judge other people with how they spend their money. And that could be even with people in the church, like my own church. It's just kind of like, well, that's not how I would spend that money, but I just, you know what? I need to trust that they know that they're going to trust the Lord with their money and their income, and they're going to make wise choices. And it's only really when people start coming to the church needing money, and we often will help people, that we begin to kind of counsel and coach and make sure they're spending their money wisely. Because once God's money, the gifts of God, begin to go to them to help support them, I want to make sure that they're making wise choices. So we've actually done it in the past where, we'll help someone, and if they need help again, it's like, well, we should sit down and do Dave Ramsey's together. So a little bit about tithes and income, how it should be spent, and just how to be good stewards with what God has given us. That's kind of our theme to finish up chapter 18. All right, laws of purification tomorrow, chapter 19. God bless you guys. I'll see you then.